Welcome to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful you've chosen to join us today. Tell us, which part of the world are you watching from? Big city? Small town? Country? We'd love to know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Man with Two Faces. Barrett Donovan drove his sleek German sedan through the winding roads of Oak Ridge, a wealthy neighborhood nestled in the hills overlooking the city. The radio played softly as wet autumn leaves clung to the windshield. At 45, Barrett had mastered the art of patience, a quality that had served him well in both his personal and professional life. To the world, Barrett was a digital security consultant with a modest demeanor who married into the prestigious Landry family 15 years ago. To his clients, mostly high-net-worth individuals and select corporations, he was the invisible guardian who protected their digital fortunes and secrets. Few knew that behind his unassuming exterior lay a tactical mind that had prevented countless cyber heists and corporate espionage attempts. Today was Thanksgiving, and Barrett's jaw clenched involuntarily as he thought about spending another holiday with the Landrys. His in-laws had never accepted him as worthy of their daughter Vivian, despite his success. To them, he would always be the scholarship kid who lucked his way into their social circle. Almost there, he mumbled to himself, checking his watch. The gold timepiece had been his father's, a hard-working electrician who died when Barrett was 19, leaving him to fend for himself through college. The watch was a reminder of where he came from and the promises he'd made to never let anyone look down on him again. His phone rang, displaying his assistant's name, Lena. "Everything in order?" Barrett asked after answering. "Yes, Mr. Donovan. Mr. Wright is standing by. All files have been prepared and verified, and the offshore accounts untraceable as requested. The judge signed the orders 20 minutes ago." Barrett allowed himself a slight smile. "Perfect timing. I'll be in touch after dinner." He ended the call as he pulled into the circular driveway of the Landry mansion. The three-story colonial stood as a monument to old money and privilege. Barrett had never felt comfortable here, even after all these years. As he approached the door, he caught his reflection in one of the decorative windows. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his tailored suit revealed nothing of his intentions. He straightened his tie, put on his most convincing smile, and rang the doorbell. Theodore Ted Landry opened the door, martini in hand. At 70, he still stood tall, his silver hair immaculately styled, his eyes cold and calculating. "Barrett, you're late," he said without offering a handshake. Traffic was heavier than expected. "Happy Thanksgiving, Ted." Barrett stepped inside, immediately assaulted by the cacophony of voices and the smell of roasting turkey. The Landry extended family was already gathered in the living room. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends, all dressed in their holiday best, all belonging to the same exclusive social circles. He spotted Vivian immediately. At 42, she remained stunning, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves, her green eyes sharp and attentive as she laughed at something her cousin had said. She wore an emerald dress that Barrett had never seen before, though he'd certainly paid for it. When she noticed him, her smile faltered momentarily before recomposing itself. She excused herself and approached him with a glass of white wine in hand. "You made it," she said, giving him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek that reeked of performance. "Wouldn't miss it." Barrett returned the smile, matching her pretense. As he followed Vivian further into the house, he noticed a familiar face that shouldn't have been there. Nolan Pierce, a family friend who worked with Ted at the investment firm. Nolan, in his late 30s with the physique of someone who spent more time in the gym than the office, caught Barrett's eye and nodded with faux friendliness. Barrett nodded back, his face betraying nothing of what he knew. The text messages, the hotel receipts, the afternoon meetings that his wife had been having with Nolan for the past 11 months. The beautiful irony was that it had been Nolan himself who had hired Barrett's firm for cybersecurity services 3 years ago, giving Barrett backdoor access to the very devices that would later document their affair. "Drink." Margot Landry, Vivian's mother, appeared beside him with a glass of scotch. Unlike her husband, Margot maintained a veneer of politeness toward Barrett, though her eyes always held the same judgment. "Thank you, Margot." He accepted the drink, knowing it would be his last indulgence of the evening. He needed his wits about him tonight. As they gathered around the massive dining table, Barrett noticed the careful arrangement of place cards. His was conspicuously absent from a main table. Vivian touched his arm. "Barrett, we're a bit crowded this year. Would you mind terribly sitting at the side table with the children? Just for dinner." Barrett looked at the small table set up in the corner where his nieces and nephews, all under 12, were already seated. "Of course," he said smoothly, though he felt his blood pressure rise. "Whatever makes things easier." Ted chuckled from the head of the main table. "Vivian, tell your husband what you really think." Vivian's cheeks colored slightly, but her eyes hardened. "He belongs with the other children," she told her smirking parents. The table erupted in poorly disguised laughter. Barrett felt all eyes on him as he stood there, the outsider who had never been accepted. His father-in-law raised his glass. "At least he's getting fed." More laughter followed as Barrett silently took his seat at the children's table. He stared at his plate, burning with shame that was quickly calcifying into cold resolve. The children glanced at him curiously, but soon returned to their own conversations. Barrett checked his watch again. 5 minutes to showtime. Chapter 2. The Call. The Thanksgiving meal progressed with the usual Landry family pageantry. Speeches about gratitude that rang hollow, discussions of vacations to exotic locations, and not-so-subtle inquiries about everyone's financial successes over the past year. Barrett sat quietly at the children's table, occasionally engaging with his young tablemates about video games and school projects. From his position, he could see Vivian and Nolan exchanging glances when they thought no one was looking. Ted dominated the conversation at the main table, pontificating about his latest business triumph, while Margot supervised the staff serving the meal with eagle-eyed precision. "Uncle Barrett, why are you sitting with us?" asked Penny, Ted's 10-year-old granddaughter from his son's marriage. "Sometimes adults need to remember what it's like to be a kid," Barrett replied with a genuine smile. Despite everything, he'd always liked children. Their honesty and lack of pretense was refreshing. "Is that why Aunt Vivian said you belong with us?" Penny persisted, her innocent question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Barrett's response was interrupted by the sudden, loud ringing of his phone. The custom ringtone echoed through the dining room, causing conversation at the main table to halt. Barrett made no move to silence it. "Barrett," Vivian hissed from across the room. "Your phone." Barrett slowly reached into his pocket and extracted his phone, making a show of checking the caller ID. "I'm sorry, but I need to take this," he said, standing up. "It's my lawyer." A tense silence fell over the room. Barrett tapped the speaker button and set the phone on the table. "Calvin, you're on speaker. What's the news?" Barrett's voice was calm and measured. "Sir, the judge just signed off." Calvin Wright's voice came through clearly. "The assets are frozen. All of them." You could hear a pin drop in the Landry dining room. Barrett looked directly at Ted, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I'm sorry to hear about the timing," Barrett continued for the benefit of the entire room. "But can you confirm exactly which assets we're talking about?" "Yes, sir. Per your instructions, we've secured judicial freezes on all Landry family accounts connected to Evergreen Partners, including the offshore holdings in Cayman and Singapore. Also, as directed, we've filed the RICO predicates against Theodore Landry and Nolan Pierce." Barrett watched as Ted's hand clutched his chest. Nolan had gone deathly pale. "The forensic accountants finished their preliminary review?" Barrett asked, maintaining his composure. "Yes, sir. Their findings supported everything you provided. The judge was particularly interested in the pattern of fraudulent investments and the misuse of client funds. The FBI has been notified as required by statute." Vivian stood up so quickly her chair crashed to the floor behind her. "Barrett, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice shook with rage and panic. Barrett calmly picked up his phone. "Calvin, I'll call you back. It seems I need to explain some things to my family." He ended the call and pocketed his phone. "Not family," he corrected himself, looking at the stunned faces around the table. "In-laws. And soon, not even that." Ted found his voice first. "You have no idea what you're doing, boy. No idea who you're messing with." Barrett smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Ted, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I've known for years. Did you really think I wouldn't discover what Evergreen Partners was really doing with client investments? That I wouldn't notice when my own father-in-law was running a glorified Ponzi scheme? He turned to Nolan, whose hand was now intertwined with Vivian's under the table. And Nolan, after you hired my firm, did you never wonder whether I might have access to all your communications? Every text, every email, every hotel reservation. The children were being quietly ushered out of the room by one of the aunts, their eyes wide with confusion and alarm. Margot's voice cut through the tension. This is ridiculous. Ted, call Harlan, she said, referring to the family's longtime attorney. Barrett laughed, a genuine sound devoid of humor. Harlan Du Bois resigned as your counsel this morning. Apparently, he doesn't want to be associated with what's coming. Smart man. He walked slowly around the table, stopping behind Ted's chair. 15 years, Ted. 15 years of subtle digs, of being treated like an outsider, of being reminded that I wasn't good enough for your daughter. And all that time, you were stealing from your clients, building your reputation on fraud. Barrett leaned down, his mouth close to Ted's ear. I didn't just freeze your assets. I own them now. Chapter 3, The Unraveling. The Landry Thanksgiving dinner had devolved into chaos. Relatives hurriedly made excuses to leave, grabbing coats and car keys as they fled what was quickly becoming a crime scene. Within 30 minutes, only the core players remained: Barrett, Vivian, Ted, Margot, and Nolan. They had moved to Ted's study, a wood-paneled room with leather-bound books and hunting trophies that Ted had never actually hunted. The old man sat behind his desk, his earlier bravado replaced by calculated desperation. Whatever you think you know, you're mistaken, Ted said, trying to regain control of the situation. My attorneys will have this cleared up by morning. Barrett leaned against the bookshelf, utterly relaxed. Your attorneys can't help you, Ted. I've been building this case for years, documenting every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated investment. Did you know that 3 of your biggest clients are actually shell companies I control? You've been stealing from me, technically speaking. Vivian paced the room, her perfect composure shattered. This is insane, Barrett. If this is about us, about Nolan and me. It's not, Barrett interrupted. Your affair is just a symptom of a much larger disease in this family. A disease called entitlement. He pulled out his phone and brought up a document. This is interesting reading, Vivian. Your prenuptial agreement. The one you and your father thought was ironclad. The one that stipulated that in case of infidelity on your part, you forfeit all claims to marital assets and family trust disbursements. Vivian stopped pacing. That's not possible. Daddy had that agreement written by the best. By Harlan, yes. The same Harlan who overlooked a crucial detail when Ted restructured the family trusts in 2019. A restructuring that, incidentally, made the trust assets vulnerable to civil asset forfeiture if the trustee, that's you, Ted, was engaged in ongoing criminal activity. Nolan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. This is blackmail. Barrett shook his head. No, Nolan. This is justice. This is consequences. He walked to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn, now dark in the November evening. For years, I've watched this family operate as if rules don't apply to them. Ted manipulates markets and defrauds clients. Margot uses charity events to launder money and reputation. Vivian marries me for convenience while maintaining her real relationships on the side. He turned back to face them. And me? I was just the useful idiot. The tech guy who legitimized your operations, who provided digital security while you committed digital crimes. Margot, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. You think you've won? You have no idea how deep our connections go. One phone call and what? Barrett cut her off. Your political friends won't take your calls anymore, Margot. Not after the documents I sent to the FBI this morning detailing the kickbacks and illegal campaign contributions. As we speak, agents are executing search warrants at Evergreen's offices and your vacation homes. Your connections are scrambling to distance themselves from you. Ted's face had turned an alarming shade of gray. You'll destroy everything. Years of work, our reputation. Your reputation was a lie, Barrett said firmly, built on fraud and maintained through intimidation. And as for destroying everything, he paused, looking directly at Vivian. That process began 11 months ago when your daughter decided our marriage vows were optional. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, Barrett couldn't tell anymore. Barry, please. We can work this out. I made a mistake. Don't call me Barry, he said coldly. That name was for someone who loved you. Someone who doesn't exist anymore. The sound of car doors slamming outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see several black SUVs pulling into the driveway, men in suits emerging with determined expressions. Right on time, Barrett murmured. You called the FBI to our Thanksgiving dinner? Margot asked incredulously. Barrett smiled. I didn't have to. Once a judge issues certain types of orders, things happen automatically. The system works when someone makes it work. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll see myself out the back way. I have a feeling you'll be busy for a while. Barrett, Ted called out, his voice suddenly old and afraid. What do you want? There must be something we can offer. Barrett considered the question seriously. What do I want? I want the last 15 years of my life back. I want the love I thought I had with Vivian to have been real. I want to not have been the joke of this family. He shook his head. But since none of that is possible, I'll settle for watching everything you value disappear. Just like you made me disappear to the children's table today. As Barrett slipped out the back door of a Landry mansion, he heard the front doorbell ring. The night air was cold and crisp, and for the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe freely. His phone buzzed with a text from Calvin Wright. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2. Barrett typed back a single word. Yes. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Barrett sat in Calvin Wright's office overlooking downtown. Snow fell lightly outside, dusting the city in white, but inside the atmosphere was warm and charged with purpose. Calvin, a shrewd attorney in his 50s with a reputation for both brilliance and discretion, reviewed documents on his tablet while Barrett gazed at the city below. The Landry Empire is collapsing faster than even I anticipated, Calvin remarked, setting down his tablet. Ted's bail was set at $5 million, which he can't access due to the asset freeze. He spent the last week in county lockup while his new attorneys scramble. Barrett nodded, feeling neither joy nor remorse, only a calm sense of justice being served. And Evergreen Partners? In receivership. The SEC has brought formal charges against both Ted and Nolan. Most clients are fleeing, and those who've lost significant amounts are filing civil suits. The firm will not survive this quarter. Barrett turned from the window. And my wife. Calvin's expression softened slightly. Vivian has filed a counter-petition challenging your divorce filing. She's claiming coercion and emotional distress. A bitter laugh escaped Barrett's lips. Of course she is. Has she moved out of the house? No. As you predicted, she's claiming primary residence rights until the divorce is settled. Barrett had expected this. The lake house he had purchased 5 years ago, the one property he'd intentionally kept solely in his name, had become his sanctuary since Thanksgiving. The modern glass and timber structure on the shore of Lake Gardner was where he now plotted the next phases of his plan. Any word from Nolan? Barrett asked. Calvin shuffled through some papers. He's distancing himself from both the Landrys and Vivian. His attorney has reached out about a possible cooperation agreement with prosecutors. Rats from a sinking ship, Barrett murmured. And the evidence package I prepared, delivered to the SEC, FBI, and the district attorney's office, as instructed. Your documentation was thorough. Barrett smiled faintly. 15 years of meticulous record-keeping. You could say I played the long game. Calvin leaned back in his chair, studying Barrett with newfound respect. Most men, upon discovering their wife's infidelity, act rashly. You waited, gathered evidence, and struck strategically. The affair was just confirmation of what I already suspected, that I was never really part of that family, just a useful accessory. Barrett stood and walked to the credenza where Calvin kept a decanter of whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass, but didn't drink immediately. I realized something important the day after Thanksgiving, Barrett continued. This isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring that people who think they're above consequences face them completely. Calvin accepted a glass of whiskey. Speaking of consequences, Margot Landry has been calling my office 3 times a day. What does she want? To arrange a meeting with you. She's being quite insistent. Barrett considered this. Margot had always been the strategic mind behind the Landry family's social maneuvering. If she wanted to meet, she had an angle. Set it up, Barrett decided. Neutral ground, public place. Tomorrow if possible. Calvin made note. Now about phase 2. The transfer of the Aspen property is complete. The shell company now legally owns the vacation home. And as per your instructions, eviction notices have been prepared for the property manager and staff. Barrett nodded, satisfaction warming him more than the whiskey could. The Aspen Ski Lodge had been Ted and Margot's pride and joy, the gathering place for their elite social circle during the winter holidays. Now it belonged to Barrett through a complex series of legal maneuvers that even the Landry's new attorneys couldn't unravel. What about the foundation? Barrett asked. Calvin pulled up another document. The Landry Family Foundation has been issued a freeze order pending investigation. Their annual Christmas gala has been canceled, and several board members have resigned. The Christmas gala, the social event of the season where the Landrys showcase their philanthropy while secretly using the foundation to shield assets and minimize taxes. Barrett had attended 14 such galas, always feeling like an outsider, even while writing large checks to causes he actually cared about. And Vivian's personal accounts? Frozen, as you requested. Her credit cards were declined at Bergdorf's yesterday. Calvin allowed himself a small smile. According to my sources, it caused quite a scene. Barrett felt a hollow satisfaction at the image. Vivian's carefully cultivated social image was disintegrating, just as his heart had when he'd first discovered her betrayal. Have the divorce papers been amended as we discussed? Barrett asked. Calvin nodded. Yes. The new terms offer her a one-time settlement of $200,000, contingent upon her immediate vacation of all properties and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. She won't accept, Barrett predicted. No, she won't, Calvin agreed. But it establishes our position for when this goes before a judge. Barrett finally took a sip of his whiskey, letting the smoky liquid linger on his tongue. What about the children? Calvin looked confused. Your children? You don't have. No, Ted's grandchildren, Penny and the others. I want to ensure they have college funds that can't be touched by what's happening. Calvin's expression softened. That's unexpected, given the circumstances. Barrett shrugged. They're innocent in all this. And they were kind to me at the children's table. Calvin made another note. I'll set up blind trust for each of them. The Landrys won't know the source of the funds. Barrett finished his whiskey and set the glass down. Thank you, Calvin. Let me know when Margot confirms for tomorrow. As Barrett left the office and stepped into the snowy afternoon, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was from his surveillance system at the lake house. Someone was at his door. The camera showed Nolan Pierce, looking considerably less polished than the last time Barrett had seen him, standing anxiously on the porch. Barrett smiled coldly. The next phase was beginning even sooner than he'd planned. Chapter 5. The Propositions. Barrett drove to the lake house with deliberate calm, the winter landscape passing by in a blur of white and gray. His mind processed the implications of Nolan's unexpected visit. The man had been Vivian's lover, Ted's protege, and, in many ways, the catalyst for Barrett's revenge plan. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see Nolan's luxury SUV parked haphazardly near the entrance. The man himself was sitting on the front steps, his expensive overcoat inadequate protection against the December cold. His face was haggard, the confident smirk replaced by desperate exhaustion. Barrett parked and approached slowly, maintaining a safe distance. He hadn't survived this long by being careless. You're trespassing, Nolan, Barrett said calmly. Nolan stood quickly, his breath clouding in the cold air. Barrett, please. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Why should I give you anything? Because I have information. Information that could help you. Barrett studied the man before him. Once so arrogant, now reduced to begging on his doorstep. It was satisfying, but also suspicious. 5 minutes, Barrett agreed, unlocking the door and gesturing Nolan inside. The lake house interior was minimalist and modern. All clean lines, natural materials, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen lake. Barrett had deliberately chosen a style completely different from the Landry mansion's ostentatious opulence. Nolan stood awkwardly in the living room, taking in the space. "Nice place. I didn't invite you here for small talk," Barrett replied coldly. "For minutes now." Nolan nodded, gathering himself. "The feds are building a massive case against Ted. They've offered me a deal if I testify. I'm aware. What you might not be aware of is that Ted has evidence that could implicate you as well. He's claiming you were complicit in some of Evergreen's more questionable dealings." Barrett laughed, genuinely amused. "Is that the best he can do? Every service my company provided to Evergreen was legitimate and documented. Ted's desperation is showing." Nolan shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Vivian, she's planning something." Barrett's amusement faded. "Explain." "She approached me last week, wanted my help to access some of your secure servers. She thinks you have offshore accounts that weren't included in the financial disclosures for the divorce. This was new information and potentially concerning." Barrett's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. "And did you help her?" Nolan looked down. "I considered it, but I realized something important. She was using me, just like she used you. The difference is you figured it out sooner." Barrett moved to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, deliberately not offering one to Nolan. "Why come to me with this? What do you want?" Nolan took a deep breath. "Protection, and a deal of my own. I can give you everything. Recordings of conversations with Ted about fraudulent investments, details about Vivian's plans, evidence that the Landrys were intentionally hiding assets for years. In exchange for immunity from your pursuit and help with the federal prosecutors. Your influence could ensure I get the best possible deal." Barrett considered the proposition. Nolan could indeed be useful, but trusting him would be foolish. "Your time is up," Barrett said, setting down his glass. "Here's my counteroffer. You'll provide everything you mentioned, every recording, every document, every detail about Vivian's plans to Calvin Wright by tomorrow morning. In return, I won't actively work against your plea deal with the feds." Nolan's face fell. "That's it. That's generous, considering your role in destroying my marriage," Barrett replied coldly. "And Nolan, if I discover you've withheld anything or if the information proves worthless, I'll ensure the federal prosecutors know about the offshore account in Belize where you've been hiding Evergreen commissions." Nolan's shock was evident. "How did you?" "I know everything," Barrett interrupted. "That's a lesson the Landrys and their associates are learning quite painfully. Now, get out of my house." After Nolan left, Barrett secured the property and made several calls, updating his security team about potential intrusion attempts on his servers. Then he prepared for his meeting with Margot the following day. The upscale cafe in the museum district was Margot's choice, neutral territory with enough public visibility to ensure civility. Barrett arrived early, selecting a table with a clear view of both entrances and the street outside. Old habits of vigilance died hard. Margot arrived precisely on time, her entrance causing a stir even in diminished circumstances. At 68, she remained striking, silver hair in an elegant chignon, her posture regal despite the obvious strain of recent events. She wore a conservative navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, though Barrett noted the absence of her usual diamond jewelry. She spotted him immediately and approached with measured steps, her expression unreadable. "Barrett," she said, taking the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Margot, you're looking well, considering." A flash of anger crossed her face before the practiced social mask returned. "Circumstances change. People adapt." "Some do," Barrett agreed. "Others face consequences." A server approached, and they both ordered Barrett a black coffee, Margot a pot of Darjeeling tea. When they were alone again, Margot leaned forward. "I'll be direct. This vendetta against my family has gone far enough." "You made your point." Barrett raised an eyebrow. "Has Ted sent you as his emissary? Or is this your own initiative?" Margot's mouth tightened. Ted is indisposed. His health has suffered since the arrest. My heart bleeds, Barrett replied dryly. Mock if you must, but you've achieved your goal. Ted's reputation is ruined. Evergreen is finished. Our social standing is decimated. Even Vivian is suffering. Barrett studied Margot carefully. In 15 years of marriage to her daughter, he'd never seen Margot Landry plead for anything. What exactly are you proposing, Margot? She straightened, more comfortable now that they were moving to negotiations. A ceasefire. You direct your attack dog lawyers to ease the pressure on the asset freezes. Allow us access to certain accounts for living expenses and legal fees. In return, we facilitate a quick, quiet divorce from Vivian with terms more favorable to her than your insulting current offer. Their drinks arrived, creating a momentary pause. Barrett took a sip of his coffee, contemplating Margot's proposal. Interesting. And what would prevent me from simply continuing my current course of action, which is proceeding quite effectively? Margot's eyes hardened, because despite what you may think, the Landry name still carries weight. Ted may be temporarily compromised, but our extended family has connections you haven't begun to confront. Threats, Margot? I expected more subtlety. Not threats. Reality. She sipped her tea with perfect composure. Additionally, I have something you want. Barrett's interest was piqued despite himself, which is the truth about why Vivian married you. The statement hung in the air between them. Barrett kept his expression neutral, though the question had haunted him since discovering the affair. He'd always assumed it was his financial prospects, or perhaps even genuine feeling at the beginning. I'm listening. Margot set down her teacup. 15 years ago, Vivian was involved with someone Ted disapproved of, a man with the right social credentials, but troubling habits. When things ended badly, there was a situation that needed to be handled discreetly. Your emergence as a prospective husband was convenient timing. Ted saw potential in your technical skills for Evergreen, and I saw an opportunity to solve Vivian's problem. Barrett absorbed this information, the final piece of a puzzle he'd been assembling for years. You arranged our meeting at the charity gala. It wasn't coincidence. Nothing in our circle happens by coincidence, Barrett. Surely you've realized that by now. The coldness that had settled in Barrett's chest since Thanksgiving hardened further. So, my entire marriage was a construction, a solution to a Landry family problem. Margot shrugged elegantly. Initially, perhaps, but 15 years is a long time. Whatever began as arrangement became reality. Until it didn't, Barrett replied. Until Vivian found someone who better matched her true preferences. My daughter has always had diverse appetites. Nolan wasn't the first, merely the most recent. The confirmation of what Barrett had long suspected hit harder than he'd anticipated. He maintained his composure with effort. And you're telling me this now because I want you to understand what you're really fighting. Not a single betrayal, but a fundamental incompatibility that was present from the beginning. This Scorched Earth campaign won't bring you satisfaction, Barrett. Only more emptiness. Barrett considered Margot's words, weighing them against everything he knew and had planned. Finally, he met her gaze directly. Thank you for your honesty, Margot. It's refreshing after years of manipulation and lies. He reached for his coat. But you've misunderstood something fundamental. This isn't just about Vivian or even Ted's financial crimes. Then what is it about? Barrett stood, placing money on the table for both their drinks. It's about consequences. For 15 years, I watched the Landry family operate as if rules were for other people. As if kindness was weakness and loyalty was for fools. He buttoned his coat, his voice remaining conversational, but his eyes cold. You're right that I won't find satisfaction in this campaign, Margot. Satisfaction isn't my goal. Justice is. And justice demands that people who have lived without consequences finally face them, completely and without compromise. Margot's composure cracked slightly. You'll destroy everything, including yourself. Barrett smiled, a genuine expression that didn't reach his eyes. Some things need to be destroyed before something better can be built. Give my regards to Ted when you visit him in custody. As Barrett walked away, his phone buzzed with a message from Calvin. Nolan delivered the materials as promised. You need to see this immediately. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The winter storm that had threatened all day finally broke as Barrett drove back to his office. Snow whipped across the windshield, reducing visibility and matching his turbulent thoughts. Margot's revelation about his marriage had struck deeper than he'd anticipated, confirming his worst suspicions while adding new layers of betrayal. Calvin was waiting in Barrett's office, a serious expression on his face. The leather portfolio on the desk between them contained the materials Nolan had delivered. "That bad?" Barrett asked, removing his snow-dusted coat. "Worse," Calvin replied. "These recordings." He gestured to the portfolio. "You need to hear them yourself." Barrett settled behind his desk and opened the portfolio. Inside were flash drives, printed documents, and handwritten notes organized with surprising care. He selected the first flash drive and plugged it into his computer. The audio was crystal clear. Nolan had apparently been recording conversations for his own protection for years. The first file featured Ted Landry speaking candidly about Barrett. "Donovan is useful but expendable. His security systems give us plausible deniability. If regulators ever get too close, he'll make a convenient scapegoat." Barrett's expression remained impassive as Ted's voice continued, discussing how they had structured certain transactions to appear legitimate while concealing their true nature. The evidence was damning for Ted, but what struck Barrett was the casual contempt with which his father-in-law discussed him, not as family, but as a tool to be used and discarded. The next recording featured Vivian and Nolan, clearly intimate, discussing Barrett. "How much longer do we have to maintain this charade?" Nolan asked. Vivian's laugh was brittle. "Until Daddy decides Barrett's outlived his usefulness. The prenup makes divorce complicated. Besides, he's so wrapped up in his work, he barely notices my absences." "But you're my woman," Nolan insisted. "Everyone knows it except him." "That's the beauty of it," Vivian replied. "He sees what he wants to see. Meanwhile, we have the best of both worlds." Barrett stopped the recording, his hand steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "When was this recorded?" Calvin checked the metadata. 8 months ago. There are dozens more spanning the past 3 years. Barrett nodded, processing this information. "And the documents?" "Financial records, mostly. Account numbers for hidden assets that weren't on our radar. But there's something else. Something I'm not sure even Nolan understood the significance of." Calvin handed Barrett a folder containing photocopies of handwritten notes. These appear to be from Ted's personal journal. There are references to something called Operation Lighthouse dating back to when you first met Vivian. Barrett skimmed the pages, his cybersecurity training allowing him to quickly identify patterns in the cryptic notes. These are coded instructions for a long-term intelligence operation. They were monitoring me before I even met Vivian. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Barrett had assumed his marriage was a convenience for the Landrys, perhaps even a genuine match that had soured. But this suggested something more calculated, a deliberate targeting. "Why?" Calvin asked, voicing the obvious question. Barrett leaned back, mind racing through possibilities. 7 years before I met Vivian, I worked briefly as a contractor for a defense intelligence agency. My security clearance gave me access to certain information that could have been valuable to someone with Ted's connections. He stood and paced the office, pieces falling into place. The Landry family didn't just use me for Evergreen. They targeted me specifically because of my background. Vivian's job wasn't just to marry me. It was to monitor me. Calvin looked stunned. "You're suggesting industrial espionage? Corporate spying? Or worse?" Barrett's voice had hardened. "Some of my projects had national security implications. If Ted was selling information gleaned from my work to foreign interests." He trailed off, the full implications too disturbing to voice aloud. While Barrett had moved into the private sector years ago, the knowledge and access he'd once had would have been valuable to many parties. "We need to inform the federal authorities," Calvin suggested. Barrett shook his head. "Not yet. This changes everything about my approach. The Landrys aren't just fraudsters and social climbers. They're potentially something far more dangerous." He returned to his desk and pulled up his secure email. I need to contact some former colleagues. People who operate in spheres where this kind of activity is taken very seriously. Calvin looked concerned. Barrett, I understand your anger, but if we're talking about potential national security issues, we need to follow proper channels. Barrett's smile was cold. That's exactly what I intend to do. But first, I need to secure myself against the inevitable counterattack. The Landrys won't go down without a fight, especially with these kind of stakes. He typed rapidly, sending encrypted messages to contacts he hadn't spoken with in years. Calvin, I need you to do 3 things. First, increase security at all properties and offices immediately. Second, accelerate the divorce proceedings. I want Vivian legally separated from me as soon as possible. Third, prepare documentation of everything we've discovered for delivery to specific federal agencies. Calvin nodded, already making notes. And what will you be doing? Barrett's expression was grim but determined. Setting a trap. The Landrys think they've been playing me for 15 years. It's time they learned who they're really dealing with. After Calvin left, Barrett sat alone in his office as the storm raged outside. The revelations had transformed his understanding of the past 15 years of his life. What he had believed was a marriage that had simply failed was actually something far more sinister, a long-term operation with him as the unwitting target. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Barrett answered cautiously. Mr. Donovan? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Special Agent Diana Walsh, FBI Counterintelligence Division. We need to speak with you immediately regarding Theodore Landry and certain international connections. Barrett closed his eyes briefly. The game had just changed dramatically. I've been expecting your call, Agent Walsh. I think we have a lot to discuss. Chapter 7, The Counterattack. 4 days after speaking with Agent Walsh, Barrett sat in a secure conference room at the federal building downtown. The windows were covered, electronic devices banned, and a white noise machine hummed in the corner to prevent any possibility of eavesdropping. Present were Agent Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, 2 other FBI agents, and a representative from the Department of Justice. To summarize what we've confirmed so far, Agent Walsh said, consulting her notes, Theodore Landry has been using Evergreen Partners as a front for selling proprietary information to foreign entities for at least 20 years. Your marriage to Vivian Landry appears to have been orchestrated primarily to gain access to your knowledge and connections from your time as a federal contractor. Barrett nodded, his expression betraying nothing of the ongoing turmoil he felt at having his entire adult life revealed as an elaborate charade. The evidence you've provided, combined with materials we've seized from Evergreen offices and the Landry residences, is compelling, continued Agent Walsh. What remains unclear is your level of awareness and involvement. I was completely unaware until recently, Barrett stated firmly. As my security clearance records will show, I've maintained all required protocols even after leaving government work. My private security firm has never handled classified information. The DOJ representative, a grave man named Adeyemi, leaned forward. Mr. Donovan, while we appreciate your cooperation, you must understand our position. You live with a key figure in this operation for 15 years. The question must be asked, how did you not notice? It was a fair question, one Barrett had been asking himself constantly since the revelation. I trusted my wife, he said simply, and the Landrys were skilled at compartmentalization. Vivian never showed interest in my previous government work, which I interpreted as respect for confidentiality. In retrospect, that lack of curiosity should have been a red flag. Agent Walsh nodded. Our preliminary assessment supports your claim of non-involvement. However, the coming days will be challenging. We're preparing to make additional arrests, including your wife. Barrett absorbed this information. When? Tomorrow morning. We wanted to brief you first because of your unique position in this case, both a potential victim and a key witness. Barrett considered the implications. The Landrys must suspect that their time is running out. They won't go quietly. We've been monitoring all known associates, one of the other agents assured him. Security has been increased around federal witnesses, and he was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Another agent entered and whispered something to Agent Walsh, whose expression immediately hardened. "Mr. Donovan, were you expecting visitors at your lake house today?" Barrett felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "No, the property should be vacant." Agent Walsh stood quickly. "We've just received an alert from the surveillance team. 2 individuals entered your property approximately 20 minutes ago. One has been identified as Vivian Landry." Barrett was on his feet immediately. "The other? Unknown male, not Nolan Pierce or Theodore Landry." Barrett's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. "I need to get there now. They could be destroying evidence or setting you up." Agent Walsh finished his thought. "We'll escort you, but you'll remain in our vehicle until we secure the scene." The drive to the lake house was tense, a caravan of unmarked federal vehicles moving swiftly through the snowy landscape. Barrett sat in the back of Agent Walsh's SUV, thoughts churning. What was Vivian doing? The lake house contained nothing incriminating against him, but it did hold his personal server with backups of evidence against the Landrys. As they approached the property, Agent Walsh received updates through her earpiece. Subjects are still inside. No movement detected for the past 10 minutes. The federal agents deployed with practiced efficiency, surrounding the house while Barrett remained in the vehicle as instructed. Through the tinted windows, he watched the scene unfold like a surreal movie. Agents with weapons drawn approaching his sanctuary, the place he'd retreated to when his world began unraveling. Minutes stretched like hours until Agent Walsh returned to the SUV, her expression grave. "Mr. Donovan, we need you to come with us. There's a situation inside." Barrett followed her through the snow, heart pounding despite his outward calm. The front door stood open, agents moving purposefully through his home. They led him to the study where his home server was kept. The scene inside made him stop cold. Vivian lay on the floor, unmoving, a pool of blood spreading beneath her head. Next to her was a man Barrett had never seen before, also motionless, a gun near his outstretched hand. "Are they?" Barrett couldn't finish the question. "Both deceased," Agent Walsh confirmed quietly. "Initial assessment suggests murder-suicide, but we'll need to process the scene fully." Barrett stared at his wife's body, a storm of conflicting emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Despite everything she'd done, seeing Vivian like this, her blonde hair stained red, her eyes forever closed, struck him with unexpected force. "The server appears to have been tampered with," another agent reported, indicating the open cabinet where Barrett's equipment was housed. "Looks like they were attempting to extract or destroy data." Barrett approached carefully, staying clear of the bodies as directed by the agents. A quick examination confirmed his fears. "They've removed the primary drive array. Without it, most of my backups are inaccessible." Agent Walsh looked sharply at him. "How damaging is this to our case?" Barrett considered the technical implications. "Not catastrophic. I maintained off-site backups that contain most of the same information. But this was definitely a cleanup operation." "And it went wrong," Agent Walsh observed, looking at the bodies. Barrett nodded slowly. "Or it went exactly as someone planned." The implication hung in the air. Was this truly a botched evidence destruction attempt that ended in violence? Or something more sinister, a way to eliminate Vivian as a potential witness while simultaneously compromising evidence and framing Barrett? "I need to make a call," Barrett said, his mind already working on contingencies. "My attorney needs to know about this immediately." Agent Walsh nodded. "Use my phone. We'll need yours as evidence since it connects to this network." As Barrett stepped outside to make the call, the winter sun was setting over the frozen lake, casting long shadows across the snow. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the chaos inside and the turmoil in his mind. Calvin answered on the first ring. "Barrett, where are you? I've been trying to reach you." "There's been an incident at the lake house," Barrett said, keeping his voice steady. "Vivian is dead. Apparent murder-suicide with an unknown accomplice." A shocked silence, then, "My God, are you all right?" "Physically, yes. But this complicates everything. They were after my server, the one containing backup evidence against the Landrys." Calvin's lawyer mind immediately grasped the implications. This has Ted's fingerprints all over it. A desperate move to silence Vivian and compromise evidence in one stroke. My thoughts exactly, but we need to move quickly. Activate Protocol Omega immediately. Protocol Omega was the contingency plan they had developed for worst-case scenarios, a comprehensive legal and digital response designed to protect Barrett and preserve evidence in the event of a direct attack. Understood. What about the Miami situation? Barrett had almost forgotten about the other operation they had in motion, tracking a suspected Landry associate who had been moving assets through Florida. Maintain surveillance, but take no action. Everything focuses on this now. As Barrett ended the call and turned back toward the house, he saw Agent Walsh watching him with an unreadable expression. Protocol Omega? She asked. Barrett met her gaze steadily. Legal contingencies, my attorney, and I prepared in case the Landrys took desperate measures. Which, as we can see, they have. Agent Walsh nodded slowly. Mr. Donovan, I've worked counterintelligence for 16 years. In my experience, when operations of this magnitude start to collapse, they rarely end cleanly. Meaning Vivian won't be the last casualty. Ted Landry is cornered, and cornered animals are at their most dangerous. Barrett looked back at his lake house, now transformed into a crime scene. I'm aware of the risks, Agent Walsh, but I've been playing this game longer than Ted realizes. He taught me an important lesson at that Thanksgiving table. That family means nothing to people like him when power and self-preservation are at stake. And what lesson are you planning to teach in return? She asked carefully. Barrett's expression hardened. That actions have consequences. No matter who you are, no matter how untouchable you think you are, the bill always comes due. As the agents continued processing the scene, Barrett stood in the cold, watching the last light fade from the sky. Vivian was gone, the woman he had once loved, then hated, and now would never fully understand. But her death changed nothing about his resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. The endgame had begun. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The news of Vivian Landry's death broke the next morning, sending shockwaves through the city's elite circles. The official statement was sparse on details, noting only that authorities were investigating a violent incident at a private residence involving Mrs. Landry and an unidentified male. Barrett, sequestered in a secure hotel under FBI protection, watched the media coverage with detached interest. The reporters knew nothing of the true complexities at play, focusing instead on Vivian's social standing and the earlier scandals surrounding Evergreen Partners. Some speculated about Barrett's whereabouts, painting him alternately as a grieving husband or a calculated mastermind. Agent Walsh entered his suite, bringing coffee and updates. Theodore Landry has been transferred to a higher security facility after we intercepted communications suggesting an escape attempt. Barrett accepted the coffee, but showed no surprise at the news. And Margot, under house arrest, pending formal charges. We've frozen all additional accounts you identified. Agent Walsh sat across from him, studying his composed demeanor. The man found with Vivian has been identified as Xavier Dimitri, a former military contractor with ties to several foreign intelligence services. A cleaner, Barrett murmured. Someone brought in to eliminate loose ends. That's our assessment as well. The question is why Dimitri turned on Vivian. Barrett considered the possibilities. Two scenarios. Either Vivian wasn't supposed to be eliminated, but something went wrong, or Dimitri was ordered to eliminate her all along, Agent Walsh finished, making it look like a murder-suicide that could potentially be blamed on you. Barrett nodded grimly, Ted cutting his losses. Vivian knew too much, and as a potential witness against her father, she became a liability. The realization that Ted Landry would sacrifice his own daughter to protect himself should have shocked Barrett. But after everything he'd learned, it merely confirmed his understanding of the man's character. There's something else, Agent Walsh said, her tone shifting slightly. We've been going through the materials recovered from the Landry estate. There's evidence suggesting that Nolan Pierce was more deeply involved than he admitted to you. Barrett raised an eyebrow. In what way? It appears he was the original liaison between Evergreen and certain foreign interests. His relationship with Vivian may have been part of a longer game, keeping tabs on both you and Ted. The layers of betrayal continued to unfold, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Barrett had assumed Nolan was merely Ted's lackey and Vivian's lover, but this suggested something far more calculated. Where is Pierce now? That's the problem, Agent Walsh admitted. He missed his scheduled check-in with his handler yesterday. We have an alert out, but so far, nothing. Barrett stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city below, a city where he had built a life that turned out to be constructed on lies. He's running, Barrett said with certainty. Probably has emergency funds and identity documents prepared. It's what I would have done in his position. Agent Walsh watched him carefully. You speak as if you understand his thinking. I've spent 15 years securing digital assets for wealthy clients, Agent Walsh. I understand how people hide things they don't want found. He turned back to face her. But I'm better at finding them than most people are at hiding them. Barrett moved to the hotel room's desk where a secure laptop provided by the FBI sat waiting. With your permission, I'd like to try something. Agent Walsh hesitated only briefly before nodding. Proceed, but I need to monitor all activities. Barrett's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing systems through channels that would have been impossible for most people. 3 years ago, Nolan asked my firm to secure his personal devices after a supposed hacking attempt. During that process, I created a backdoor, standard procedure for high-risk clients who might need emergency assistance. That's somewhat ethically questionable, Agent Walsh noted, though without real censure. Barrett's mouth quirked. In retrospect, it was one of my better decisions. If Nolan is still using any of those devices. After several minutes of intense concentration, Barrett straightened. Got him. He's accessed his emergency email account twice in the past 12 hours. Based on the IP addresses. He paused, analyzing the data. He's heading south, probably aiming for Mexico. Agent Walsh was already on her phone, relaying the information to her team. When she finished, she gave Barrett an appraising look. You could have had a successful career in our world, Mr. Donovan. I chose a different path, Barrett replied simply. And now, when this is over, she asked. Barrett hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead. His focus had been so completely on unraveling the Landry conspiracy and pursuing justice that he'd given little thought to what came after. One battle at a time, Agent Walsh. Ted Landry is still fighting, even from custody. Until he's fully neutralized, nothing is over. As if summoned by his words, Barrett's secure phone rang. Calvin Wright calling with news. Barrett, we have a situation. The judge overseeing Ted's case has recused himself suddenly. The replacement is Judge Harmon Carlton. Barrett's expression darkened. Carlton was at the Landry's Christmas gala last year. He and Ted share membership at the same exclusive club. Exactly. This is delay tactic written all over it. The new judge will need time to review the case, and meanwhile, Ted's team is filing motions to reconsider bail. Barrett had anticipated this move. The Landry influence extended into judicial circles, and Ted would exploit every connection available. Activate the Carlton file, Barrett instructed, referring to one of many dossiers he had prepared on Landry Associates. Send it to Agent Walsh's team anonymously. After ending the call, Barrett found Agent Walsh watching him with intense curiosity. Don't want to know what's in the Carlton file. Nothing illegal, Barrett assured her. Just documented connections between Carlton and the Landrys that would constitute a clear conflict of interest. Material that should have prompted the judge to recuse himself before accepting the case. Agent Walsh shook her head slightly. You really did prepare for every contingency. 15 years married to a Landry taught me to always plan 3 moves ahead. Barrett checked his watch. We should prepare for the next phase. Ted will be getting desperate, and Margot is still free enough to act as his proxy. What do you anticipate? Barrett considered the question seriously. A direct appeal, probably from Margot, offering some kind of deal, evidence against bigger fish in exchange for leniency. When that fails, a public character assassination against me. And if all else fails, he paused. A more permanent solution to the Barrett-Donovan problem. Agent Walsh's expression hardened. We'll increase your security detail. Barrett shook his head. That won't be necessary. In fact, I think it's time we allowed some controlled information to leak regarding my whereabouts. You want to draw them out? Agent Walsh realized. I want to end this, Barrett corrected. And sometimes, to catch a predator, you need to present the right bait. Agent Walsh looked skeptical. We can't authorize using you as bait in an active federal investigation. Barrett smiled thinly. Who said anything about authorization? I'm simply a private citizen who might be careless enough to be seen at his office tomorrow morning. Before Agent Walsh could object further, Barrett's secure phone rang again, this time with a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. Barrett? It's Penny. Penny Landry. The young voice of Ted's granddaughter was shaking. I'm scared. They said you might be able to help us. Barrett's expression changed instantly, his tactical calculations giving way to genuine concern. Penny? What's happened? Where are you? At Grandma Margot's house. But people came and took her away, and now there's no one here except the housekeeper, and she's crying and won't tell us what's going on. Us? Who's with you, Penny? My brother Miles and our cousins. We were supposed to have a sleepover, but now everyone's gone, and we don't know what to do. Barrett met Agent Walsh's eyes, silently communicating the situation. She was already making calls, presumably to determine if Margot's arrest had been executed without proper provisions for the children. Penny, listen to me carefully. Everything's going to be okay. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Don't answer the door for anyone. I'm coming to get you. After assuring Penny again and ending the call, Barrett turned to Agent Walsh. I need to go. Now. We'll send a child services team. No, Barrett interrupted firmly. Those children know me. They're scared and confused. I'm not going to let them be handed off to strangers. Agent Walsh appeared torn between protocol and human compassion. This could be a trap. It could be, Barrett acknowledged. But if it is, it's an incredibly elaborate one, using a terrified child as bait. Are you willing to take that chance? The decision was made quickly after that. With a small team of agents for security, Barrett headed to Margot's townhouse. As they drove through the darkening city, Barrett reflected on the unexpected turn of events. He had been prepared to face down Ted and Margot's final desperate moves, but he hadn't anticipated being called to protect their grandchildren. The Landry children had always been innocent bystanders in this war. Barrett had ensured their college funds were protected, but he'd given little thought to their immediate well-being in the chaos of arrests and investigations. When they arrived at the townhouse, Barrett insisted on approaching alone, with agents covering from a distance. He rang the bell and waited, alert for any sign of danger. The door opened to reveal Penny's tear-streaked face. At 10 years old, she was old enough to sense the gravity of the situation, but too young to understand it. Uncle Barrett, she cried, throwing her arms around him in relief. You came. Barrett hugged her gently, scanning the foyer behind her for threats. I promised I would. Where are the others? Penny led him to the kitchen where 3 other children, ranging from 7 to 12, sat huddled together at the table. The housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Perez who had worked for the Landrys for decades, stood nearby, looking lost and frightened. Senor Donovan, she exclaimed when she saw him. Gracias a Dios. I did not know who to call. The police, they took Mrs. Landry, but said nothing about the children. Barrett assured the children and Mrs. Perez that everything would be all right, though he knew the road ahead would be challenging for all of them. As he organized their temporary care with the agents and child welfare specialists who arrived shortly after, Barrett felt a strange sense of closure. In the midst of all the betrayal and deception, these children, the youngest members of the Landry dynasty, had turned to him in their moment of need. Not to their grandfather's powerful friends or their parents' social circle, but to the man who had once been banished to the children's table at Thanksgiving. It was a small victory, but perhaps the most meaningful one of all. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months after the events at the lake house, Barrett stood at the railing of his penthouse balcony, watching the summer sunset paint the city skyline in gold and amber. The warm evening breeze carried the distant sounds of traffic and life below. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary circumstances that had reshaped Barrett's existence. Beautiful view, remarked Calvin Wright, joining him with 2 glasses of scotch. Worth every penny of that obscene price you paid. Barrett accepted the offered drink with a small smile. I consider it an investment in my future. The penthouse had been one of his first purchases after the final legal settlements. Located in a recently completed tower downtown, it represented a clean break from his past. No connections to the Landrys, no memories of Vivian, just floor-to-ceiling windows and endless possibilities. Speaking of investments, Calvin continued, the Barrett Donovan Security Group's IPO filing has the financial press in a frenzy. Early valuations are exceeding even our optimistic projections. Barrett nodded, unsurprised. The publicity surrounding the Landry case had inadvertently showcased his cybersecurity expertise to the world. What had once been a boutique security firm serving select clients had transformed into a rapidly expanding enterprise with government contracts and international reach. And the foundation? Barrett asked. The Lighthouse Foundation's first round of scholarships will be announced next week. 20 students from disadvantaged backgrounds receiving full rides to study cybersecurity and digital ethics. Barrett felt genuine satisfaction at this news. The foundation, named with deliberate irony after Ted's covert operation against him, had become his most personally meaningful project. Using a significant portion of the assets recovered from the Landrys, he had established a program specifically designed to help young people who, like him years ago, had talent and drive but lacked financial resources and connections. Any word from Agent Walsh? Calvin asked after a comfortable silence. She's been reassigned to a task force investigating similar operations. Apparently, the Landry case opened up several new avenues of inquiry into foreign influence networks. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond Ted Landry and Evergreen Partners, uncovering connections to international business figures and even political campaigns. Ted himself had eventually agreed to a cooperation deal, though his information had proven less valuable than prosecutors hoped. Too many of his contacts had gone aground once news of his arrest broke. And Ted's sentencing? Calvin prompted. 22 years, Barrett replied. Given his age, essentially a life sentence. Neither man commented on the justice of this outcome. Ted Landry had orchestrated not only financial crimes, but operations that compromised national security and ultimately led to his own daughter's death. The court had shown little mercy. Margot's appeal was denied, Calvin added. She'll serve the full 7 years, though I suspect she'll find ways to maintain her comforts even in federal prison. Barrett took a sip of his scotch, thinking of his former mother-in-law. Margot had been charged as an accessory, her role in the operations less direct than Ted's, but still significant. True to her nature, she had negotiated the best possible terms for herself, sacrificing old allies without hesitation. And Nolan Pierce remains in the wind. Calvin concluded their update. Though there are rumors of a sighting in Argentina last month, Barrett had mixed feelings about Nolan's escape. On one hand, justice demanded he face consequences for his role in the Landry operations and his affair with Vivian. On the other hand, Nolan had provided critical evidence that helped bring down Ted. Perhaps living in perpetual fear of capture was its own form of punishment. The children are adapting well, Barrett said, changing the subject to something that had unexpectedly become important to him. Penny called yesterday to tell me about her science project. Following the arrests, the Landry grandchildren had been placed with various relatives, none of whom had been directly implicated in Ted and Margot's crimes. Barrett had initially maintained distance, conscious of the complications his presence might create in their lives. But Penny had persistently reached out, and gradually he had become something of a mentor figure to her, and eventually the other children as well. You never expected to become the favorite uncle of the Landry grandchildren, Calvin observed with a hint of amusement. Barrett shook his head. Life takes unexpected turns. They moved inside as the evening air cooled. The penthouse interior was minimalist but warm. Natural materials, clean lines, and carefully chosen art that reflected Barrett's true tastes rather than the ostentatious style Vivian had insisted upon in their shared homes. On his desk sat a small frame containing a handwritten note, a thank you card from Penny for the microscope he had sent for her birthday. It was a reminder that amid all the destruction and injustice he had wrought upon the Landry Empire, something positive had emerged. "Do you ever regret how things unfolded?" Calvin asked, settling into one of the leather armchairs. "Not the justice part, but the collateral damage? Vivian's death, the children's trauma?" Barrett considered the question seriously. He had asked himself the same thing during sleepless nights over the past months. "I regret that it came to this," he finally answered. "I regret that what I thought was love was actually an elaborate deception. I regret that children had to witness the destruction of their family legacy." He paused, looking out at the city lights now twinkling in the dusk. "But I don't regret pursuing the truth, no matter how painful. And I don't regret ensuring that people who believe themselves above consequences finally face them." Calvin nodded thoughtfully. "And your future? Beyond the company and the foundation?" Barrett hadn't shared his latest plans with anyone yet, but Calvin had earned his trust through unwavering support during the darkest days. "I've been approached about consulting on a national cybersecurity initiative. It would mean returning to government work in some capacity, using what I've learned from the private sector to help protect others from operations like the one that targeted me." "You'd be good at that," Calvin observed. "You understand both the technical and human aspects of security breaches." Barrett smiled faintly. "I had excellent teachers in the art of betrayal." As Calvin left later that evening, Barrett remained in his living room, nursing a final glass of scotch and reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the scholarship kid who married into wealth to the outsider at the Thanksgiving table, to the architect of the Landry dynasty's downfall, each version of himself had led inexorably to this moment. His phone chimed with a message from Penny, a photo of her completed science project with the caption, "First place," followed by a string of excited emojis. Barrett sent back his congratulations, a genuine smile forming as he typed. In the end, his revenge had been complete. Justice served cold and meticulously, just as he had planned since that humiliating moment at the Thanksgiving table. The assets had indeed been frozen, the Landry Empire dismantled, and Ted would spend his remaining years in federal prison. But the true victory, Barrett realized, wasn't in the destruction he had wrought, but in what he had built from the ashes. A life entirely his own, defined not by his connection to the Landrys, but by his own choices and values. He raised his glass in a silent toast to the future, one where he would never again allow himself to be seated at someone else's children's table, but would instead be the one who determined who was worthy of a place at his own. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Golden Child Shadow. Julian Kane had always lived in the shadow of expectations that were never meant for him. At 30, he stood 6'2" with broad shoulders earned from years of construction work, his hands calloused from building other people's dreams while his own gathered dust. His dark hair was already showing streaks of premature gray, a testament to the stress of carrying a family that had never learned to carry itself. The Kane family business, Kane and Sons Construction, had been Julian's inheritance and his burden. His father, Herbert Kane, had built the company from nothing in the 1980s, turning it into one of the most respected construction firms in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. When Herbert died of a heart attack 3 years ago, Julian had stepped up without question, keeping the family business alive and profitable. But profit, Julian had learned, was a relative term when you had siblings like his. His sister Francine Kane Mansfield had married into money, or so she liked to pretend. Her husband, Taylor Mansfield, worked in financial consulting and spoke in the kind of corporate jargon that made simple concepts sound revolutionary. They lived in a sprawling suburban home with a 3-car garage and a golden retriever named Winston who, according to Francine, had better breeding than most people. His brother Sean, Kane, had taken a different path. At 28, he dropped out of college twice, failed at 3 different business ventures, and was currently finding himself through a series of get-rich-quick schemes and motivational seminars. Their mother, Paula Kane, enabled his every failure with a checkbook and unconditional support that Julian had never experienced. Julian's wife, Sophia Kane, had once been Sophia Charles, a real estate agent he'd met 4 years ago when he was contracting work on a development she was selling. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made men stop and stare. Auburn hair that caught the light just right, green eyes that seemed to promise secrets, and a smile that could disarm the most suspicious buyer. Their wedding had been the social event of the season, at least according to Sophia. But lately, that smile had been increasingly rare, and those green eyes held secrets Julian was beginning to suspect he didn't want to uncover. The first sign had been the late nights. Sophia claimed the real estate market was booming, requiring her to show houses at all hours. Then came the new wardrobe, designer clothes that seemed excessive for showing split-level ranches to young families. The final red flag was her sudden interest in fitness, joining an expensive gym across town when there was a perfectly good 5 minutes from their house. Julian wasn't naive. He'd grown up in a family where loyalty was conditional and love came with price tags. He'd learned to read people, to spot the tells that preceded betrayal. But knowing something and proving it were different things entirely. As he sat in his office at the construction site on a gray February morning, reviewing contract for the Morrison residential project, Julian's phone buzzed with a text for Francine. Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making pot roast. Be there by 5. Not an invitation, a command. Julian stared at the message, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settle on his shoulders. Every Sunday, the Kane family gathered at their mother's house on Maple Street, the same house where Julian had grown up feeling like a guest in his own home. He typed back, "I'll be there." What he didn't add was that this Sunday would be different. This Sunday, Julian had plans that extended far beyond pot roast and small talk. Plans that had been months in the making, waiting for the right moment to unfold. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. Sunday dinner at the Kane house was a ritual as predictable as it was exhausting. Paula Kane's dining room hadn't changed in 20 years. The same floral wallpaper, the same china cabinet filled with dishes that only came out for holidays, the same family photos that conspicuously featured fewer pictures of Julian as the years progressed. Julian arrived exactly at 5, bringing a bottle of wine that he knew wouldn't be appreciated but brought anyway out of habit. Sophia was already there, having driven separately, another recent development that she explained away with vague mentions of errands and timing. Julian, his mother's voice carried that particular tone of surprise she used when he actually showed up, as if his presence was unexpected despite the command performance invitation. Paula Kane was 62 and fought every year of it with hair dye and expensive creams that she charged to the company credit card under business expenses. "Hi, Mom." Julian kissed her cheek dutifully, inhaling the cloud of perfume that always reminded him of church and disappointment. Francine emerged from the kitchen carrying a casserole dish, Winston trotting behind her like a furry shadow. "Oh good, you made it. I was telling Mom about Winston's new trainer. Did you know dogs can learn to paint? He's already showing real artistic potential." Julian bit back his first 3 responses and settled for, "That's great, Francine." Sean was conspicuously absent, though his place was set at the table. This wasn't unusual. Sean operated on what he called creative time, which typically meant showing up whenever he felt like it. "Where's Sean?" Julian asked as they gathered around the table. "He's running a little late," Paula said, serving portions with the precision of a surgeon. "He's been so busy with his new venture. Did I tell you he's starting a consulting business?" Julian caught Sophia's eye across the table. She was picking at her food, her attention focused on her phone. "What kind of consulting?" "Life optimization," Paula said proudly. "He's going to help people unlock their full potential." "For a fee, I assume," Julian said. "Of course for a fee," Francine interjected. "Expertise has value. Not everyone can just swing a hammer for a living." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Julian set down his fork slowly, the way he did when he was calculating the load-bearing capacity of a structure before it collapsed. That hammer swinging pays for a lot around here, he said quietly. Julian, Sophia said, her voice carrying a warning that he'd heard more frequently lately. Let it go. But Julian was tired of letting things go. Tired of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who cleaned up everyone else's messes while they mocked his methods. Actually, I think we should talk about it, Julian said. Since we're all here. Sean chose that moment to burst through the front door, bringing with him the energy of someone who'd never met a responsibility he couldn't postpone. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was insane. At 7 p.m. on a Sunday in Cedar Rapids, traffic was about as insane as a church bake sale, but no one challenged the lie. They never challenged Sean's lies. I was just telling Julian about your consulting business, Paula said, immediately shifting her attention to her youngest son. Oh man, it's going to be huge, Sean said, loading his plate with enthusiasm that Julian wished he'd show for actual work. I've got this whole system worked out. It's like life coaching, but deeper, more holistic. What are your qualifications? Julian asked. Sean laughed, the kind of laugh that suggested Julian was missing something obvious. Experienced brother. I've lived through failure, learned from it, and now I can help others avoid the same mistakes. By charging the money for advice you couldn't follow yourself. The table went quiet. Even Winston seemed to sense the tension, slinking over to lie down by Francine's feet. Julian, Paula said, her voice sharp with disapproval. Your brother is trying to better himself. With whose money? That's enough. Sophia's voice cut through the room like a blade. We should be supporting each other, not tearing each other down. Julian looked at his wife, really looked at her. The new diamond earrings that he hadn't bought. The designer handbag that cost more than most people's rent. The way she was defending his family against him, as if he was the problem. You're right, Julian said, standing up. We should support each other. That's what families do. He walked to the window, looking out at the street where he'd grown up, where he'd learned that being dependable made you invisible and being generous made you a target. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, he continued. About what family means. About loyalty. About who you can really count on when everything falls apart. When he turned back to the table, 5 pairs of eyes were watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to annoyance. Only Sophia looked worried, and that worried him most of all. What's that supposed to mean? Francine asked. Julian smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed all evening. It means my birthday's coming up, and I'm planning something special. Chapter 3, The Birthday Revelation. 3 weeks later, Julian woke up on his 30th birthday to an empty house and a single text message from Sophia. At the gym early. Happy birthday. Dinner tonight. He stared at the message for a long moment, noting what wasn't there. No kiss goodbye, no card on the nightstand, no acknowledgement that this was supposed to be a milestone. Just a question mark that somehow made dinner sound like an inconvenience rather than a celebration. Julian made coffee in the kitchen of the house he'd bought with his own money, paid for with his own labor, and felt the familiar weight of solitude that had become his most constant companion. He'd taken the day off work, the first personal day he'd taken in 8 months, and the silence stretched around him like an accusation. His phone remained stubbornly quiet throughout the morning. No calls from his mother, no texts from his siblings, no acknowledgement from anyone in his family that this day meant anything at all. By noon, Julian had received exactly 3 birthday messages. One from his foreman at the construction site, one from his accountant, and one from the auto shop reminding him his inspection was due. That was when he decided to check social media. Julian rarely used Instagram. It was Sophia's domain, full of carefully curated images of their life that bore little resemblance to reality. But something made him open the app, scroll through the endless parade of other people's happiness, and then he saw it. A photo posted by his sister Francine, time-stamped an hour ago. The location, Riverside Event Center, one of the most expensive venues in the city. The image, his entire family gathered around an elaborately decorated table, party hats on their heads, celebrating with champagne and cake. The guest of honor wasn't human. Winston the golden retriever sat in a custom high chair, wearing a bow tie and a birthday crown, surrounded by presents wrapped in gold paper. The cake in front of him was shaped like a bone and probably cost more than Julian spent on groceries in a month. The caption made his blood freeze. The only one who deserves celebration. Our precious Winston turns 3 today. Hashtag best boy ever. Hashtag family first. Hashtag love him. Julian stared at the photo, cataloging every detail with the methodical precision he used for structural inspections. His mother, beaming with more joy than he'd seen from her in years. Sean, actually dressed up for once, raising a champagne flute in a toast. Francine and Taylor, looking like the perfect couple celebrating their perfect dog's perfect day. And Sophia, his wife, wearing the dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, laughing at something Sean was saying, holding a glass of champagne like she belonged there. Like she was part of a family that had deliberately excluded her own husband on his birthday to celebrate a dog. Julian's hands were surprisingly steady as he typed a comment. Nice venue. The response came within minutes from his mother's account. That dog is worth more than you. The words hit him like a physical blow, not because they were surprising, but because they were true. Not financially, Julian knew his net worth down to the penny, but emotionally. To his family, Winston the dog was worth more love, more attention, more celebration than Julian had ever received. Julian typed his response carefully. Enjoy it while you can. Then he put his phone down and made one call, followed by 3 carefully crafted text messages that would change everything. The call was to Roberto Vaughn, a private investigator Julian had hired 2 months ago when his suspicions about Sophia became impossible to ignore. Roberto's report was due tomorrow, but Julian moved up the timeline. I need everything you have. Tonight. Julian, are you sure? Maybe you should wait until tonight. The first text went to his lawyer, Neil Moore, a man who specialized in asset protection and understood that sometimes the best defense was a devastating offense. The second text went to his accountant, requesting an emergency audit of all accounts connected to Kane and Sons Construction. The third text went to someone his family had never heard of, someone who had been waiting patiently for Julian to make a decision he'd been avoiding for months. As the sun set on his 30th birthday, Julian sat in his empty house and opened Roberto's report. The photographs were crisp and clear. Sophia entering and leaving a downtown hotel with Ernest Thayer, the city's deputy planning commissioner. The same Ernest Thayer who had the power to approve or deny the construction permits that kept Julian's business running. The timestamps told a story Julian had suspected but hoped wasn't true. Lunch meetings that ran past dinner. Hotel visits that coincided with Sophia's gym sessions. Business dinners where Julian wasn't invited, but his wife somehow was. The final photograph showed Sophia and Ernest in what was clearly a hotel room, and Julian closed the folder without looking further. He'd seen enough. 2 weeks later, his phone rang at 6 in the morning. Francine's name flashed on the screen, and Julian let it go to voicemail before calling her back. You can't do that, TOUS, she screamed before he could say hello. I'll sue you for $80,000 in damages. Julian leaned back in his chair at the construction office, watching the sunrise paint the sky the color of justice. Good morning to you too, Francine, he said calmly. What seems to be the problem? Chapter 4, The Unraveling. The problem, as Francine saw it, was that Julian had somehow reached through the carefully constructed walls of her perfect life and torn everything down in a single night. The venue is demanding payment, she shrieked into the phone. They said the credit card was declined, and now they want the full amount plus penalties. $80,000. Julian sipped his coffee, savoring both the caffeine and the panic in his sister's voice. That's unfortunate. What does that have to do with me? Don't play dumb. You canceled the company credit card. Without warning. I didn't cancel it, Julian said truthfully. I simply exercised my authority as CEO to review all business expenses. Seems Winston's birthday party was charged to Kane and Sons Construction as a business expense. The silence on the other end was deafening. It was a mistake, Francine stammered. Taylor must have grabbed the wrong card. For an $80,000 dog party. What was the business purpose of that expense, Francine? You know what? Francine's voice shifted from panic to rage. You're being petty because we didn't invite you to a family gathering. Grow up. A family gathering. Julian repeated. On my birthday. Oh, please, like you care about birthdays. You never even show up for anything anyway. Julian set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. I show up for everything, Francine. Every Sunday dinner where you mock my work. Every holiday where Sean gets bailed out of his latest failure. Every crisis where mom needs the reliable son to fix what the favorite son broke. That's not. I showed up when dad died and someone needed to run the business. I showed up when Sean defaulted on his car loan and needed someone to co-sign the new one. I showed up when your precious Winston needed emergency surgery and your husband's consulting fees couldn't cover the vet bills. The silence stretched long enough for Julian to hear his sister's breathing change. So let me ask you again, Julian continued, his voice deadly calm. What was the business purpose of an $80,000 party that I wasn't invited to, charged to my company, to celebrate a dog's birthday on my birthday? Julian, Francine's voice was smaller now, the fight draining out of it. Mom planned it. She said you wouldn't mind. She said you never use the card anyway. Mom doesn't have authorization to use company funds. You know who does? Julian, please. We'll pay it back. It was just supposed to be a way to humiliate me while celebrating a dog with my money. I understand perfectly. Julian ended the call and immediately dialed Neil Moore. Neil, I need you to file the paperwork we discussed. Today. Are you sure about this, Julian? Once we start down this path. They started us down this path. I'm just choosing the destination. The paperwork Neil filed that morning would restructure Kane and Sons Construction as a limited liability company with Julian as the sole owner and decision-maker. Every family member who had been drawing salary, benefits, or expenses from the company would need to reapply for their positions and justify their value to the organization. It was perfectly legal and devastatingly effective. But that was just the opening move. The real game was happening across town, where Sophia was about to discover that Julian's patience had limits that even her considerable charm couldn't exceed. Roberto Vaughn was waiting in the lobby of the downtown Marriott when Sophia arrived for her gym session at 2 p.m. He didn't approach her. That wasn't his job today. His job was to document every detail of what happened next. Ernest Thayer had no idea he was walking into a trap when he met Sophia in the hotel bar. He had no way of knowing that Julian had spent weeks learning everything about Ernest's life. His marriage to Bernadette Thayer, his teenage daughter who attended private school, his aspirations for higher office, and most importantly, his complete dependence on maintaining a spotless public reputation. What Ernest also didn't know was that Julian had already met with 3 members of the City Planning Commission over the past month, sharing concerns about potential conflicts of interest in the permit approval process. Nothing specific, of course, just general observations about the importance of transparency in city government. By 3 p.m., when Sophia and Ernest moved their meeting to room 412, Roberto had photographed every moment of their arrival. But more importantly, he'd photographed the envelope Julian had asked him to deliver to the front desk an hour earlier. The envelope contained printed copies of every photograph Roberto had taken over the past 2 months, along with a note written in Julian's careful handwriting. Mr. Thayer, I believe these belong to your wife. I thought she should know where you've been spending your afternoons. J. Kane, the hotel manager, a woman named Caroline Delaney who owed Julian a favor from a construction project he'd completed under budget and ahead of schedule, personally delivered the envelope to room 412 at exactly 3:30 p.m. Roberto later told Julian that the shouting could be heard 3 rooms away. While Sophia's world was imploding at the Marriott, Julian was making his final move against his family. The meeting with his mother took place in the same dining room where she'd served pot roast and casual cruelty for 30 years. Julian, honey, what's this about? Paula asked, gesturing to the folder of documents Neil had prepared. Francine said something about the company, but I didn't understand. It's about accountability, Mom, Julian said, sitting in the same chair where he'd endured countless lectures about responsibility while watching his siblings avoid consequences for everything. It's about the fact that you spent $80,000 of company money on a dog's birthday party on my birthday. Paula's face went through several expressions before settling on the wounded innocence she'd perfected over the years. That was a mistake, sweetie. We got confused about the cards. No confusion. Francine used the company card because she knew I'd pay for it. Just like I always do. Julian, you're being unreasonable. It's just money. It's my money, earned by my work, from a company I've been running for 3 years while you and Sean and Francine take draws like you're contributing something other than criticism. Julian slid the documents across the table. Effective immediately, Kane & Sons Construction is restructuring. All family members currently receiving compensation from the company will need to interview for their positions and demonstrate their value to the organization. Paula stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You can't do this. Your father left the company to me. Not to you. Not to Sean. Not to Francine. To me. But we're family. Julian stood up, feeling lighter than he had in years. Family doesn't charge $80,000 to humiliate each other. Family doesn't choose a dog over their son on his birthday. Family doesn't take and take and take while calling the person paying for everything worthless. Julian, please. The interviews are next week. Neil has the details. Julian walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and Mom, send me Winston's veterinary records. If he's going to be treated like family, he can get his own health insurance instead of billing it to my company as a business expense. The drive home took Julian past the Marriott, where he could see Roberto's car still in the parking lot. Sophia's car was gone, but Ernest's BMW remained, which suggested the afternoon had gone exactly as Julian had planned. His phone was already buzzing with increasingly frantic calls and texts from his family, but Julian didn't answer. He had one more stop to make before his transformation was complete. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. Clayton Sanders' law office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that Julian's company had renovated 2 years earlier. Clayton specialized in family law, but his real expertise was in making problems disappear quietly and permanently. Julian, Clayton said, rising from behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Right on time. Julian had been planning this meeting for 6 months, ever since he'd realized that his marriage was a performance and his family was a business expense he could no longer afford. Do you have everything? Julian asked. Clayton opened a file thick enough to choke a horse. Divorce papers, asset protection agreements, restructuring documents for the business, and a few surprises that should keep everyone very cooperative. The prenup? Ironclad. Sophia gets exactly what she brought to the marriage, which according to our audit was approximately $14,000 in credit card debt and a leased Honda Civic. Julia nodded. Sophia had been smart about hiding her affair, but she'd been sloppy about everything else. The designer clothes, expensive dinners, and weekend trips she'd been taking were all paid for with joint credit cards and bank accounts that Julian could trace to the penny. What about Ernest? Clayton smiled the way sharks smile when they smell blood. Deputy Planning Commissioner Thayer has some very interesting financial records. Seems he's been approving permits for developments where his wife's real estate company was the listing agent. Technically legal, but ethically questionable. How questionable? Questionable enough that the mayor would be very interested in avoiding any scandals before the next election. Questionable enough that Mrs. Thayer might be very motivated to keep her husband away from other people's wives. Julian's phone buzzed again. Sophia, calling for the 7th time in the past hour. This time, he answered. Where are you? Her voice was ragged, desperate in a way he'd never heard before. At Clayton Sanders' office, Julian said calmly. We've been having a very productive conversation about asset division and marital misconduct. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Julian, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You always were good with explanations. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The question is what you're going to do about it. Julian could hear her breathing change, could picture her in their kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that she'd insisted they couldn't afford but somehow managed to buy anyway. What do you want? She asked finally. I want you gone. Tonight. Take what you brought to this marriage and leave everything else. Julian, please. I made a mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices over multiple months with multiple lies to cover them up. Now I'm making a choice. Where am I supposed to go? Julian looked at Clayton, who was making notes with the enthusiasm of a man billing by the hour. I'm sure Ernest has some suggestions. After all, you've been spending so much time discussing real estate together. We can't, his wife found out. She's filing for divorce. He's not returning my calls. The satisfaction Julian felt was clean and sharp, like the feeling of a perfectly measured cut. That's unfortunate. Maybe you should have considered the consequences before you decided to use my marriage as cover for your real estate ventures. Julian, I love you. No, Sophia. You love what I could provide. There's a difference. He ended the call and looked at Clayton. How long before this is final? In Iowa? With a prenup this solid and evidence of adultery? 6 months if she fights it. 3 if she's smart enough to sign everything. Make sure she understands the benefits of being smart. Julian left Clayton's office feeling like he'd shed a weight he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The sun was setting as he drove home, painting the sky the color of endings and beginnings. His house felt different when he walked through the door. Sophia's things were gone. Her clothes, her makeup, her collection of real estate awards that he'd never understood the point of. She'd left behind the furniture they'd bought together, the appliances he'd paid for, and a note on the kitchen counter written in her careful handwriting. I never meant for it to happen this way. I'm sorry. Julian crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Apologies were just words, and words were cheap. Actions had consequences, and consequences were expensive. His phone rang again, this time showing Sean's name. Julian let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message while opening a beer from a refrigerator that was finally his again. Dude, what the hell is going on? Mom's crying, Francine's threatening to sue you, and Sophia showed up at my apartment saying you kicked her out? Call me back. We need to talk. Julian deleted the message without responding. He was done talking to people who only wanted to communicate when they needed something from him. But the evening wasn't over. At precisely 8 p.m., his doorbell rang. Julian opened it to find Ernest Thayer standing on his porch, looking like a man who'd spent the day discovering exactly how much his life was worth to the people he'd thought he could trust. We need to talk, Ernest said. No, Julian replied, starting to close the door. Please. The word came out like Ernest was choking on it. 5 minutes. Julian studied the man who'd been sleeping with his wife, who'd been using his marriage as a cover for an affair that could have destroyed both their lives. Ernest looked older than his 42 years, with thinning hair and the soft build of a man who'd never done physical labor. He was exactly the kind of man Julian had expected Sophia to choose, safe, connected, and completely lacking in the backbone required to build something lasting. 5 minutes, Julian said, stepping aside. Ernest entered the living room like he was walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. I want you to know I never meant for it to happen. Funny, Julian said. Sophia said the same thing. It just developed. We were working on the permit applications for your projects, and she was handling the real estate side, and we started meeting to coordinate. And you decided to coordinate in hotel rooms. Ernest flinched. I know how it looks. It looks like you were using your position on the planning commission to expedite permits for developments where my wife was the listing agent, while sleeping with her on the side. It wasn't like that. Julian sat down in his recliner, the one piece of furniture in the house that was truly his. What was it like, Ernest? I love her. The words hung in the air like a confession. Julian found himself almost impressed by Ernest's honesty, even if his timing was catastrophically bad. Then why are you here instead of with her? Ernest's face crumpled. My wife filed for divorce this afternoon. She's taking the kids to her mother's house. My boss called me into his office and suggested I take a leave of absence while the ethics committee reviews my conduct. And Sophia won't return my calls. Says she needs time to think. Julian nodded slowly. So you've lost your wife, your kids, probably your job, and the woman you claim to love won't talk to you. And you're here because I want to know what you want from me. Nothing, Julian said simply. I don't want anything from you, Ernest. You've already given me everything I needed. I don't understand. You've proven that my wife was exactly who I thought she was. You've demonstrated that the people I trusted were worth exactly what I always suspected. And you've shown me that sometimes the best thing you can do is let people make their own choices and live with the consequences. Ernest stared at him with the expression of a man who'd expected anger and found something much worse, indifference. What about the permits? The project we were working on? Julian smiled, and Ernest took an involuntary step backward. Those projects will proceed based on their merits, not on whether the deputy planning commissioner was sleeping with my wife. I believe in doing business the right way, Ernest. Always have. Then why? Why did I expose your affair? Because I believe in transparency. Because I think your wife deserved to know where you were spending your afternoons. Because I think the people of this city deserve public officials who can keep their personal lives from interfering with their professional duties. Julian stood up, and Ernest backed toward the door. And because Julian continued, I believe that people should face the consequences of their choices. You chose to have an affair with a married woman. Sophia chose to betray her marriage vows. My family chose to humiliate me with my own money on my birthday. Everyone made their choices. What about your choices? Julian opened the front door. I chose to stop pretending that loyalty was something other people owed me instead of something I could demand through consequences. After Ernest left, Julian sat in his quiet house and made a list of everything he needed to do in the coming weeks. The divorce proceedings would be straightforward. The business restructuring would eliminate the financial deadweight his family had become. The house would be his alone, decorated according to his preferences instead of Sophia's expensive taste. For the first time in years, Julian Kane felt like the master of his own life. But he wasn't done yet. Chapter 6, The Fallout. The interviews began the following Monday at exactly 9 a.m. in the conference room of Kane & Sons Construction. Julian had arranged the schedule alphabetically, which meant his mother was first. Paula Kane entered the room like she was attending a funeral, dressed in the black suit she reserved for the most serious occasions. She sat across from Julian and Neil Moore with the air of someone who'd been gravely wronged by the universe. This is ridiculous, she said before anyone could speak. I'm your mother, and I'm the CEO of this company, Julian replied, consulting the notes Neil had prepared. Let's start with your current position. Can you describe your role at Kane & Sons? I don't have a role. I have a relationship. I'm family. Neil made a note on his legal pad. For tax purposes, Mrs. Kane has been receiving a salary of $60,000 annually as Community Relations Coordinator, plus benefits. What duties does that position entail? Julian asked. Paula shifted uncomfortably. I represent the company at community events. Church functions, charity dinners, that sort of thing. Can you provide documentation of these activities? Calendars, reports, outcomes? I don't write reports, Julian. I build relationships. With who specifically? The interview continued for 20 minutes, during which Paula was unable to identify a single concrete business outcome from her community relations efforts. She couldn't name any contracts that resulted from her networking, any referrals she generated, or any measurable benefit to the company's reputation. I see, Julian said when she'd finished. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. That's it. Paula's voice cracked slightly. You're not even going to... The position of Community Relations Coordinator is being eliminated, Julian said. However, there's an opening for a part-time administrative assistant. 15 hours a week, $20 an hour, no benefits. You're welcome to apply. Paula stared at him like he'd spoken in ancient Greek. Administrative assistant, filing, answering phones, basic clerical work. The position reports to Mrs. Rita Chambers, our office manager. You want me to answer phones? I want you to contribute value to this company proportional to what you take from it. Whether that's answering phones or finding another job is your choice. Paula left without another word, and Julian could hear her crying in the parking lot through the conference room window. Francine's interview was scheduled for 10 a.m., but she arrived 30 minutes late with Taylor in tow for moral support. I assume you're here to apologize, she said, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything. I'm here to conduct an employment interview, Julian replied. Taylor, this is a private meeting. He's staying, Francine said. I want a witness. Julian looked at Neil, who shrugged. It's your company. Fine. Francine, can you describe your current position with Kane & Sons? I'm the marketing director. And your salary? $45,000 plus benefits and expenses. Can you show me examples of marketing materials you've created? Francine opened her mouth, then closed it. I work more on strategy than execution. What strategies have you implemented? Well, I suggested we should advertise in the church bulletin. Did we? No. You said it was too expensive. Julian made a note. What else? For the next 15 minutes, Francine described a series of marketing ideas that had never been implemented, strategies that had never been developed, and campaigns that existed only in her imagination. Her greatest accomplishment appeared to be designing business cards that were never printed. I see, Julian said finally. The marketing director position is being eliminated. You can't fire family. I'm not firing you. I'm eliminating a position that serves no function. However, there's an opening for a sales associate. Commission-based, no base salary. You'll be responsible for generating new business through cold calls and referrals. Francine looked like Julian had suggested she take up snake charming. Sales? I don't do sales. Then I guess you don't work here. This is because of the party, she said, her voice rising. You're punishing us because of one mistake. I'm eliminating positions that don't generate value, Julian said calmly. If you believe your marketing efforts have value, I'm sure other companies will be happy to hire you. Francine stormed out, dragging Taylor behind her like a piece of luggage. Sean's interview was scheduled for 2 p.m., but he didn't show up. At 2:30, Julian's phone buzzed with a text. This is BS. I'll start my own company. Julian showed the message to Neil, who smiled. I think that takes care of the business development consultant position. What business development consultant position? The one that was paying your brother $35,000 a year to think about maybe developing business someday. Julian leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of years of family obligation lifting from his shoulders. Send termination letters to all 3 of them. Final paychecks, COBRA information, the works. What about severance? Family doesn't get severance, Julian said. They get exactly what they've earned. That evening, Julian came home to find 17 missed calls and 43 unread text messages. He scrolled through them while eating takeout Chinese food in his blessedly quiet kitchen. From his mother, how could you do this to your own family? From Francine, you're going to regret this when you need us. From Sean, you always were a selfish bastard. From various aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd heard partial versions of the story. Everything from concerned inquiries to direct accusations. Julian deleted them all without responding. The knock on his door came at 8 p.m. This time, it was Roberto Vaughn, holding a manila envelope and wearing the expression of a man with interesting news. Thought you should see this, Roberto said, handing over the envelope. Taken this afternoon. The photograph showed Sophia loading suitcases into a car Julian didn't recognize. A red Mustang convertible that probably cost more than most people made in a year. The driver was a man Julian had never seen before. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never met a problem he couldn't buy his way out of. Who is he? Julian asked. Max Booker. Owns 3 car dealerships and a chain of restaurants. Recently divorced, worth about $12 million. Julian studied the photographs. Sophia was laughing at something Max was saying, her hand on his arm in a gesture Julian remembered from their own early dates. She moved on with impressive speed. How long? Julian asked. Best I can tell, about 2 weeks. He filed for divorce a month ago, around the same time your wife started her gym membership. So she was hedging her bets. Smart woman, Roberto said. If the thing with Ernest hadn't blown up, she could have kept both relationships going indefinitely. Julian set the photographs on his kitchen counter next to the takeout containers. Send copies to Clayton. He'll want them for the divorce proceedings. You okay? Roberto asked. Julian considered the question. His wife was gone. His family had disowned him. His business was leaner but more profitable. His house was quiet but peaceful. I'm perfect, he said, and for the first time in years, he meant it. Chapter 7. The Reconstruction. 6 weeks after the birthday that changed everything, Julian Kane walked through the offices of Kane and Sons Construction and felt like he was seeing the place for the first time. Without the constant drain of unnecessary salaries and manufacturer crises, the company was running more efficiently than it had in years. Rita Chambers had been promoted to operations manager, a position that came with real authority and a significant raise. She'd hired 2 new administrative assistants, actual qualified candidates instead of relatives, and implemented systems that made the daily operations run like clockwork. The construction crews were happier too. Without the constant pressure to fund family expenses disguised as business costs, Julian had been able to improve working conditions, upgrade equipment, and offer performance bonuses that actually rewarded productivity. "Morning, boss," called out Brad Maynard, the foreman on the Morrison project. "We're 3 days ahead of schedule and under budget." Julian nodded, unsurprised. The Morrison project was the same one he'd been working on the morning Francine called about the venue charges. Without the distraction of family drama and financial manipulation, his focus had returned to what he did best, building things that lasted. His phone buzzed with a text from Clayton Sanders. "Divorce hearing scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. Sophia's attorney is pushing for spousal support. We need to talk." Julian pocketed the phone and headed to his office, where he found an unexpected visitor waiting in the lobby. Alberta George was in her 70s, impeccably dressed, and had the bearing of someone accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of personality. "Mr. Kane? I'm Alberta George. I believe we have some mutual acquaintances." Julian shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "We haven't, but I know your family quite well. Your mother and I attend the same church. Your sister and I served on the hospital charity board together." Julian gestured toward his office. "Please come in. Can I get you coffee?" "That's very kind." Alberta settled into the chair across from his desk with the grace of someone who'd been conducting business meetings since before Julian was born. "I'll be direct, Mr. Kane. I'm here about the Riverside Event Center situation." Julian kept his expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The $80,000 bill your sister can't pay. The venue has contacted me about purchasing the debt. And you're interested because—" Alberta smiled, and Julian understood why she'd been successful in business for 5 decades. "Because I believe in consequences, Mr. Kane. Your sister used that venue for a party designed to humiliate you, charged it to your company without authorization, and now expects someone else to clean up the mess. Where you propose, I purchased the debt for 60 cents on the dollar. Francine owes me 48,000 instead of 80. I collect through garnishment of her husband's wages until it's paid in full, with interest." Julian leaned back in his chair. "Why would you do that?" "Because your sister has been telling people that you're the villain in this story. Poor Francine, victimized by her cruel brother who doesn't understand family loyalty." Alberta's smile sharpened. "I thought she should learn what real financial pressure feels like." "And what do you want from me?" "Nothing. This is a gift. Consider it a welcome to the club." "What club?" "People who refuse to be taken advantage of by family members who confuse love with unlimited financial resources." After Alberta left, Julian sat in his office thinking about the concept of justice. For 30 years, he believed that being the responsible one meant absorbing the consequences of everyone else's choices. He thought that family meant accepting disrespect in exchange for belonging. But Alberta George had shown him a different perspective. Sometimes justice wasn't about punishment. It was about allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their decisions without interference. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Clayton Sanders' name appeared on the screen. "Julian, we have a problem. Sophia's attorney is claiming emotional distress and financial hardship. They're asking for $50,000 in temporary spousal support while the divorce is pending." "On what grounds?" "They're arguing that your actions, exposing the affair, freezing accounts, forcing her to leave the house, constitute intentional infliction of emotional distress." Julian laughed, a sound that had more in common with a chainsaw than humor. "She's claiming emotional distress because I documented her affair and protected my assets. They're also claiming she can't work because the scandal has damaged her reputation in real estate." "Interesting theory. What's your recommendation?" "Fight it. We have documentation that she was planning to leave the marriage anyway. The relationship with Max Booker proves she was looking for an exit strategy. But Julian, I have to ask, are you prepared for this to get uglier? Julian looked out his office window at the construction site where his crews were building something solid and permanent. Clayton, I've spent 30 years watching my family take everything I built and use it against me. I'm done being cooperative. What does that mean? It means we don't just fight the spousal support claim. We go on offense. That afternoon, Julian made 3 phone calls that would change the trajectory of the divorce proceedings. The first call was to the Iowa Department of Revenue. Julian reported suspected tax fraud related to unreported income from real estate commissions. If Sophia had been hiding assets during their marriage, the state would be very interested in collecting back taxes and penalties. The second call was to Ernest Thayer's Ethics Committee. Julian provided detailed documentation about the timing of permit approvals relative to Sophia's real estate commissions. While technically legal, the appearance of impropriety would ensure Ernest's career in public service was over. The third call was to Max Booker's ex-wife, a woman named Constance Booker who, according to Roberto's research, was still fighting for asset disclosure in her own divorce proceedings. Mrs. Booker, this is Julian Kane. I believe we have a mutual interest in ensuring that Max's financial disclosures are complete and accurate. The conversation that followed was illuminating. Constance Booker had suspected her husband of hiding assets for months, but she hadn't been able to prove it. Julian's photographs of Sophia with Max, combined with the timeline of their relationship, suggested that Max had been planning his exit from his marriage longer than his financial disclosures indicated. If you're willing to share those photographs, Constance said, my attorney can subpoena Max's financial record for the period when he was seeing your wife. If he was spending money on her while claiming poverty in our divorce proceedings, he could face perjury charges, Julian finished, and substantial penalties. Plus, any assets he transferred or concealed would be subject to recovery. Julian agreed to share the photographs, not out of vindictiveness, but out of principle. If Max wanted to play in multiple divorce proceedings simultaneously, he should face the consequences of his choices. By the end of the week, the landscape had shifted dramatically. Sophia's request for spousal support was withdrawn when her attorney learned about the tax investigation. Ernest Thayer submitted his resignation from the Planning Commission. Max Booker's divorce proceedings were reopened with new evidence of financial misconduct. Julian received one final call from his mother on Friday evening. Julian, please. We're family. Can't we work this out? Mom, Julian said, standing in his kitchen that no longer echoed with other people's problems. We're family. That's exactly why this needed to happen. I don't understand. Family means holding each other accountable. Family means not using love as an excuse for disrespect. Family means contributing instead of just taking. But we love you. No, Mom. You love what I could provide. There's a difference. Julian ended the call and looked around his house, truly his house now, free of obligations to people who had confused his reliability with weakness. The transformation was complete, but the story wasn't over. Chapter 8. The New Foundation. 3 months later, Julian stood in the boardroom of what was now officially Kane Construction LLC, looking at quarterly reports that told the story of a company reborn. Without the financial burden of supporting unproductive family members, the business had grown by 30%. They'd hired 6 new employees, all based on merit rather than genetics, and had won contracts for 2 major commercial projects. Not bad for a company that was supposedly destroyed by family infighting, said Rita Chambers, reviewing the financial statements with obvious satisfaction. Julian smiled. The rumors had been spectacular. Depending on who was telling the story, Julian had either driven his family into poverty through greed, lost his mind over a failed marriage, or was heading for bankruptcy after alienating all his connections. None of the stories were true, but Julian had stopped caring about public opinion around the same time he'd stopped caring about family approval. How's the Morrison development coming? He asked. Finished 2 weeks early and 15% under budget. The buyer is so happy they've referred us to 3 other projects. Julian nodded, unsurprised. Quality work had a way of speaking for itself, unlike family connections which mostly just made noise. His phone buzzed with a message from Clayton Sanders. Divorce finalized. Sophia gets exactly what the prenup specified. You're officially free. Julian felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the end of his marriage and everything to do with the end of a chapter in his life where other people's choices had dictated his circumstances. The knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. Roberto Vaughn entered, carrying a folder and wearing an expression that suggested he had news worth hearing. Thought you'd want to know, Roberto said, settling into his usual chair. Sophia's engagement to Max Booker has been called off. Oh, turns out Constance Booker's attorney was very thorough in reviewing Max's finances. They found about $2 million in assets he'd failed to disclose, plus evidence that he'd been supporting Sophia for months before either divorce was filed. Julian raised an eyebrow. Criminal charges? Perjury, contempt of court, and fraud. Max is looking at serious jail time and financial penalties that will probably cost him everything. And Sophia? Unemployed. The Real Estate Commission is investigating her relationship with Ernest Thayer. Turns out she'd been getting inside information about upcoming development projects and using it to target properties for her clients. Julian absorbed this information without satisfaction or schadenfreude. These were simply the natural consequences of choices other people had made. What about Ernest? Resigned from the Planning Commission, separated from his wife, working at a hardware store in Des Moines. His wife got the house, the kids, and most of his pension. Roberto closed the folder and studied Julian's face. Most people would feel something about all this. Victory, satisfaction, revenge, something. Julian considered this. I feel relief, he said finally. Relief that I'm no longer responsible for managing the consequences of other people's poor choices. And your family? What about them? Sean's consulting business failed. He's back to living with your mother. Francine and Taylor are struggling with the debt payments to Alberta George. Your mother had to sell the house and move into a retirement community. Julian felt a brief flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it passed quickly. They're adults, Roberto. They made their choices. And you don't feel any obligation to help? Julian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the construction site where his crew was laying the foundation for a new office building. The work was precise, methodical, built to last. I spent 30 years helping, he said. I covered their debts, cleaned up their messes, and absorbed their disrespect. And what did I get for it? A birthday party for a dog charged to my company while they called me worthless. Roberto nodded slowly. So what's next? Next, I build something better. A company based on merit instead of obligation. Relationships based on mutual respect instead of financial dependence. A life where my generosity is a choice instead of an expectation. After Roberto left, Julian sat alone in his office and made a list of the changes in his life since that February birthday. Divorced from a wife who had been using their marriage as cover for multiple affairs. Free from family members who treated his success as their inheritance. Running a more profitable business with better employees. Living in a house that reflected his preferences instead of other people's demands. Sleeping better than he had in years. The list looked like a balance sheet, and the numbers were decidedly in his favor. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Julian Kane. Mr. Kane? This is Deborah Ackerman from the Chamber of Commerce. I'm calling about the Contractor of the Year award. The committee would like to schedule a presentation ceremony. Julian paused. He'd submitted his company for consideration 6 months ago, back when he was still trying to prove himself worthy of recognition from people whose opinions he valued. Now the award felt like acknowledgement of something he already knew, that he was good at what he did, regardless of what anyone else thought. That's very kind, Julian said. When were you thinking? Next month. We'd like to feature Kane Construction in our annual publication, and we're hoping you'd be willing to speak at our spring dinner about business resilience and family enterprises. Julian almost laughed at the irony. I'd be honored. After hanging up, Julian realized that the old Julian would have called his family to share the news, would have invited them to the ceremony, would have tried to use his success to bridge the gaps they'd created. The new Julian simply made a note on his calendar and moved on to the next item on his agenda. But the day wasn't over. At 6 p.m., as Julian was preparing to leave the office, He received one final visitor that would remind him why he'd made the choices he'd made. Sophia Kane, soon to be Sophia Charles again, stood in his lobby looking like a woman who'd lost a war she hadn't realized she was fighting. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. Sophia looked smaller than Julian remembered, as if the weight of consequences had compressed her into a more compact version of herself. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater that looked like they came from a department store rather than a boutique. Her hair was shorter, less styled, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion around her eyes. "Julian," she said, her voice carrying none of the confidence he remembered. "Thank you for seeing me." Julian gestured toward his office, noting how she hesitated before taking the chair across from his desk. The same chair where she used to sit when she visited him at work, back when she'd been interested in his success instead of threatened by it. "What can I do for you, Sophia?" She stared at her hands for a long moment before looking up. "I wanted to apologize. For everything." Julian waited, curious to see where this conversation would lead. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," she continued, "but I need to say it. I was wrong. About the affair, about using our marriage as cover, about taking advantage of your trust. I was wrong about all of it." "Okay," Julian said simply. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away." Julian leaned back in his chair, studying the woman he'd once loved enough to marry. "What do you understand, Sophia? That you were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it for something that was never real." Her voice cracked slightly. "Ernest was using me to get information about development projects. Max was using me to hide assets from his wife. They never cared about me. They cared about what I could do for them. And what could you do for them? For Ernest? I was his cover story and his source of inside information about real estate values. For Max? I was his alibi and his emotional validation while he hid money from his divorce proceedings." Julian nodded. "So they treated you the way you treated me." Sophia flinched as if he'd slapped her. "Yes. And now that it's backfired, you want what? Sympathy? Understanding? Reconciliation? I want you to know that I realize what I lost. That I know you were faithful and generous and patient, and I repaid that by betraying everything you believed about our marriage." Julian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Sophia's old BMW used to sit. Now there was a practical Honda Civic that probably belonged to one of his new employees. "Sophia," he said without turning around, "what you're describing isn't love. It's regret. What's the difference? Love would have prevented you from having the affair in the first place. Regret is what you feel when the consequences catch up with you." Julian turned back to face her. If Ernest hadn't lost his job, if Max hadn't been exposed as a fraud, if your career hadn't been destroyed, would you be here apologizing? She started to answer, then stopped. The honesty in her eyes was probably the most genuine emotion she'd shown in their entire marriage. "I don't know," she said finally. "I do," Julian said. "You'd still be with Max, living off his money while he committed fraud to avoid supporting his ex-wife. Or you'd be with someone else who could provide what you thought you needed. Julian, you're here because your other options ran out, not because you realized you loved me." Sophia's composure finally cracked, and tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Please, I have nowhere else to go. I've lost everything." "No," Julian said, his voice gentle but firm. "You traded everything. For excitement, for financial security, for the fantasy that someone else could give you a better life than the one you had. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" Julian sat back down, looking at this woman who had shared his bed, his home, his dreams, and his bank account while planning her exit strategy. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Sophia. Trust is. And trust, once broken the way you broke it, doesn't get rebuilt. It gets replaced. With what? With clarity. With boundaries. With the understanding that some choices are permanent." Sophia wiped her eyes with a tissue from the box Julian kept on his desk. "So there's no chance? No possibility that we could try again?" Julian thought about this question seriously, as he did all important questions. He thought about the Instagram photo that had started his transformation, about the months of lies and deception, about the systematic way Sophia had manipulated their marriage to serve her interests. If I took you back, Julian said slowly, what would that teach you about consequences? What would it teach me about self-respect? What would it teach anyone who's watching this situation about the value of faithfulness and honesty? It would teach forgiveness, redemption, second chances. No, Julian said. It would teach that betrayal is temporary, but financial security is permanent. It would teach that apologies can erase actions. It would teach that consequences only apply to other people. Sophia stared at him for a long moment, and Julian could see her processing the finality in his voice. What am I supposed to do now, she asked. Build a new life based on who you actually are instead of who you think you can manipulate into supporting you. I don't know how to do that. Then learn. The same way I learned how to live without a family that treated me like an ATM. The same way I learned how to run a business without relatives who confused nepotism with competence. The same way I learned how to be happy in a house where no one was lying to me. Julian stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. Sophia, I genuinely hope you figure out how to build something real. But you're going to do it without me. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, then turned back one final time. Do you ever think about what we could have had? If I hadn't, if things had been different? Julian considered the question. I think about what we did have. A marriage where one person was building a future while the other person was planning an escape route. I think that tells me everything I need to know about what we could have had. After Sophia left, Julian sat in his office as the sun set over Cedar Rapids, painting the sky the color of endings and beginnings. He thought about the journey from that February birthday to this moment, from humiliation to liberation, from obligation to choice, from being used to being respected. His phone buzzed with a text from Rita Chambers. Reservation confirmed for the contractor's dinner next month. Should I order flowers for the table? Julian smiled and typed back, yes, but nothing too fancy. We're celebrating work, not image. As he locked up the office and walked to his truck, Julian reflected on the lesson that had taken him 30 years to learn, that being loved and being useful were not the same thing. His family had found him useful. Sophia had found him useful. But none of them had loved him enough to value what he offered instead of just taking what he provided. The drive home took him past the house where he'd grown up, now occupied by strangers who probably had no idea about the drama that had unfolded there months earlier. He passed the hotel where Sophia and Ernest had conducted their affair, now just another building with no power to hurt him. When Julian pulled into his driveway, he felt the same sense of peace that had become his default state since removing the sources of chaos from his life. His house was quiet but not lonely, organized but not obsessive, comfortable but not extravagant. He had dinner alone and enjoyed it. He watched television without interruption and appreciated it. He went to bed without worrying about other people's problems and slept soundly because of it. 6 months ago, Julian Kane had been a man whose generosity was taken for granted, whose success was treated as community property, and whose loyalty was repaid with betrayal. Tonight, he was a man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the refusal to be taken advantage of. The transformation was complete. The birthday that had shown him exactly how little his family valued him had become the catalyst for building a life where his value was never questioned, because he no longer gave anyone the opportunity to question it. Julian Kane slept the sleep of a man who had learned that happiness wasn't about being loved by people who didn't respect you. It was about respecting yourself enough to only accept love that came with respect attached. In the morning, he would wake up and continue building things that lasted. Buildings, businesses, relationships, and a life based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. But tonight, for the first time in 30 years, Julian Kane went to sleep knowing that tomorrow belonged entirely to him. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.